Picture this. Your own father looks you in the eye and says women aren't cut out for leadership. Now imagine he says this while you're secretly running the Fortune 500 company that just acquired his struggling business. This is exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, and the story of how I got there will blow your mind. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I need to take you back to where this all began, my childhood in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. Growing up in the Chen household meant one thing was crystal clear. My father, David Chen, believed the business world belonged to men, and women belonged at home. David owned Chen Manufacturing Solutions, a mid-sized automotive parts company. He'd built from scratch in the 1990s. Every evening at dinner, he'd share stories about his business dealings, always emphasizing how real leadership requires a man's touch and how women get too emotional to make the tough calls. When my younger brother Marcus showed interest in the family business, Dad's eyes would light up. When I asked questions about profit margins or supply chain logistics, he'd pat my head and suggest I focus on my studies instead. The turning point came during my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to Stanford's business program with a full scholarship, something that should have made any parent proud. Instead, Dad sat me down in his home office, surrounded by framed photos of him shaking hands with various business partners. All men. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about your future," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "This Stanford thing is impressive, but let's be realistic. You're a smart girl, but business leadership isn't in your nature. Women simply don't have what it takes to run companies. They lack the killer instinct, the ability to separate emotion from logic. You'd be better off studying something more suitable." I remember the exact words because they burned into my memory like a brand. He suggested I switch to education or nursing, respectable careers for women, and forget about business entirely. When I protested, explaining my passion for strategy and operations, he dismissed it as a phase. That conversation changed everything. Not because it discouraged me, but because it lit a fire inside me that would burn for the next 15 years. At Stanford, I threw myself into every opportunity. While other students were partying, I was studying case analyses of Fortune 500 companies, learning how they operated, how they made decisions, how they grew. I became obsessed with understanding what separated successful companies from failing ones. My professors noticed my dedication, and by my junior year, I was already being recruited by top consulting firms. But I had bigger plans. During spring break of my senior year, instead of heading to Cancun like my classmates, I flew to New York and spent the week in the offices of Meridian Global Holdings, a massive conglomerate that owned everything from tech startups to manufacturing companies. I'd managed to secure an informational interview with their VP of Strategic Acquisitions through a Stanford alumni connection. Sarah Morrison, the VP, was everything my father said women in business couldn't be: sharp, decisive, commanding respect from everyone in the room. During our meeting, she looked at my resume and said something that would shape my entire career path. "Rebecca, you have an interesting background in manufacturing through your family business. We're always looking for people who understand both the operational and strategic sides of industry. Have you ever considered corporate development?" That conversation introduced me to a world I never knew existed, the world of corporate acquisitions, where giant companies buy smaller ones to expand their reach. Sarah explained how Meridian identified promising mid-market companies, analyzed their potential, and either acquired them outright or took controlling stakes. It was like a chess game played with real businesses and real people's livelihoods. Graduated summa cum laude, and immediately joined Meridian's corporate development team as an analyst. My first assignment was to research manufacturing companies in the Southwest that might be acquisition targets. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I attacked the work with everything I had. The learning curve was brutal. 60-hour weeks were standard. And I was constantly surrounded by Harvard and Wharton MBAs who seemed to speak in a language of financial models and market analyses that I was still learning. But I had something they didn't: real understanding of how manufacturing companies actually operated, thanks to growing up around Dad's business. While my colleagues focused purely on the numbers, I could spot operational inefficiencies and growth opportunities that others missed. When we evaluated an automotive parts manufacturer in Texas, my analysis revealed supply chain optimization opportunities that could increase margins by 12%. Insights that came from remembering conversations I'd overheard at Dad's dinner table years earlier. My success rate on deals was exceptional. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior analyst, then associate. By year 5, I was a principal, leading my own acquisition teams. Sarah Morrison became my mentor, teaching me not just the technical aspects of corporate development, but the art of negotiation, the psychology of business owners, and how to see opportunities where others saw problems. The work was addictive. Every deal was a puzzle, understanding why a company was struggling, what it would take to turn it around, and whether it fit into Meridian's broader strategy. I developed a reputation for being able to analyze companies quickly and accurately, identifying both hidden value and potential risks that others missed. By my 8th year at Meridian, something unprecedented happened. The CEO, Robert Hayes, called me into his corner office overlooking Manhattan. I'd met him maybe 3 times in my entire tenure, so I was nervous as I walked past his assistant and into the wood-paneled room where billion-dollar decisions were made daily. "Rebecca," he said, gesturing for me to sit across from his massive "Dekai." "Sarah tells me you've been instrumental in our manufacturing sector acquisitions. Your deal success rate is the highest in the company's history." I thanked him, unsure where this was leading. "I'm creating a new position, Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, Manufacturing Sector. The role would put you in charge of all manufacturing deals across North America. You'd have a team of 12 people reporting to you and complete autonomy over deals up to $500 million. Are you interested?" I was 29 years old, and he was offering me control over $500 million in acquisition decisions. I accepted on the spot. The promotion came with something I hadn't expected: access to Meridian's target company database. This was a confidential list of hundreds of companies that Meridian was monitoring as potential acquisitions, complete with financial analyses, growth projections, and acquisition timelines. As I scrolled through the database during my first week, in the new role, one entry made my heart stop. Chen Manufacturing Solutions, Phoenix, Arizona. Status: under review. Acquisition timeline: 18 to 24 months. My father's company was on Meridian's radar, and according to the analysis, it wasn't for good reasons. The report detailed declining revenues, outdated equipment, losing market share to more efficient competitors, and most critically, an aging owner with no clear succession plan. The assessment was brutal but accurate. Dad's company was slowly failing, and he was too proud or too stubborn to see it. For the first time in my career, I faced a personal dilemma. I could remove Chen Manufacturing from consideration, protecting my father's business from acquisition, or I could let the process continue naturally, potentially putting me in the position of acquiring my own family's company. I chose option 3. I would personally oversee the Chen Manufacturing acquisition, ensuring it was handled with the care and respect my father's life's work deserved, even if he had never shown that same respect for my capabilities. The decision to personally handle the Chen Manufacturing acquisition meant I had to become an expert on my father's business without him knowing. I assembled a team of 3 analysts and gave them a cover story. We were conducting a comprehensive market analysis of Southwest automotive parts manufacturers. What they didn't know was that I was using this research to understand exactly how dire my father's situation had become. The findings were worse than I'd expected. Chen Manufacturing's revenue had dropped 38% over the past 5 years. Their main contracts were with automotive companies that were shifting production overseas, and Dad hadn't adapted. While competitors invested in automation and lean manufacturing processes, he'd stuck with the same equipment and methods from the 1990s. Most troubling was the debt situation. Dad had taken out a series of loans against the company's assets to cover operating expenses, thinking the downturn was temporary. The financial projections showed Chen Manufacturing had maybe 18 months before they'd be forced into bankruptcy or a fire sale. My team's lead analyst, James Rodriguez, knocked on my office door one Tuesday morning with a thick folder under his arm. "Rebecca, I've got the operational assessment on Chen Manufacturing," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "This company is a textbook case of management refusing to evolve with market conditions. The owner appears to be in complete denial about his situation." James opened the folder and spread out financial charts and operational analyses. "Their equipment is 15 years behind industry standard. Their per-unit production costs are 42% higher than the sector average. They're losing money on almost every contract they fulfill, but they keep taking them because they're desperate for cash flow." As he continued detailing the company's weaknesses, I found myself thinking about all those dinner conversations from my childhood. Dad would come home frustrated, complaining about unfair competition from companies that were cutting corners with automation. He never understood that his competitors weren't cutting corners. They were investing in the future while he clung to the past. "What's your recommendation?" I asked James. "Honestly, this company needs a complete operational overhaul. New equipment, restructured processes, probably a 50% workforce reduction to match current production needs. It would take about 2 years and roughly $40 million in investment to make it competitive again. And if someone wanted to acquire it?" James shrugged. "Current valuation puts it around $12 million, but that's being generous. A smart buyer could probably get it for $8 million, especially if the current owner is facing imminent financial pressure. $8 million. My father's life's work, everything he'd built, was worth less than some people's vacation homes." That evening, I drove to Phoenix to visit my parents. I hadn't been home in 6 months, and I wanted to see the situation firsthand. Dad was in his workshop behind the house, tinkering with a prototype part design. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Rebecca, what brings you home?" he asked, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." "How's business?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. His face darkened slightly. "Challenging times. These big corporations don't care about quality anymore, just the cheapest bid, but we'll weather it like we always do." I walked around his workshop, looking at the hand tools and small machines he used for prototyping. Everything was meticulously organized, showing the same attention to detail that had made Chen Manufacturing successful in its early years. "Dad, have you ever thought about modernizing the main facility? Maybe investing in some newer equipment?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rebecca, you sound like Marcus. He's always pushing me to spend money we don't have on fancy machines. But I built this company with these hands and this brain, not with computers and robots. But if the industry is changing, the industry will come back around. It always does. You just have to be patient and stick to your principles." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, he set down his tools and really looked at me for the first time since I'd arrived. "You know, I'm proud of what you've accomplished up in New York. That consulting work must be interesting." I almost corrected him. I wasn't in consulting anymore and hadn't been for years. But I realized he didn't actually know what I did for a living. Our conversations were always surface level, focused on family news and general pleasantries. He'd never once asked for details about my career. "It has its moments," I said carefully. "Just remember not to get too caught up in all that corporate nonsense. At the end of the day, real business is about building something with your hands, creating value that people can touch. All that financial engineering you probably see up there, it's not real business. The irony was staggering. He was dismissing the very skills that could save his company while praising the outdated approach that was destroying it. Over dinner, Mom mentioned that Marcus had been asking more questions about potentially joining the business after finishing his MBA at Arizona State. "He's got good instincts," Dad said. "Understands that manufacturing is about precision and consistency. He could take over when I'm ready to step back." "What about Rebecca?" Mom asked quietly. Dad glanced at me, then back at his plate. "Rebecca's doing well in her field, but business ownership requires a different kind of thinking. Marcus has the right temperament for it." I excused myself early and drove back to the airport, my mind racing. My father was planning to leave the company to Marcus, who had no real business experience, while dismissing my 15 years in corporate strategy. Meanwhile, his company was circling the drain, and he was too proud to see it. Back in New York, I made a decision that would change everything. I accelerated the Chen Manufacturing acquisition timeline. I scheduled a meeting with Robert Hayes and Sarah Morrison to discuss a strategic opportunity in the Southwest manufacturing sector. We met in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor, with its panoramic view of Manhattan. "I've identified a potential acquisition target that fits perfectly with our manufacturing portfolio expansion," I told them, sliding copies of my analysis across the polished table. "Chen Manufacturing Solutions in Phoenix. It's a family-owned automotive parts manufacturer with established client relationships but significant operational inefficiencies." Sarah studied the financial projections. "The numbers look rough. Why? Are we interested?" 2 reasons. First, their client base is solid. They have long-term contracts with 3 major automotive companies. Second, their facility and location are perfect for our Southwest expansion strategy. With proper investment, we could turn this into a regional hub for our manufacturing operations. Robert leaned back in his chair. "What kind of investment are we talking about?" "Approximately $40 million over 2 years for equipment upgrades and process optimization. But the potential return is significant. We could increase their production capacity by 60% while reducing per-unit costs by half." "And the current owner?" This was the moment of truth. "The owner is approaching retirement age with no clear succession plan. Based on their financial pressure, I believe we could acquire the company for $8 to $10 million, well below its operational value." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's aggressive pricing. They're facing cash flow problems and potential bankruptcy within 18 months. We'd actually be doing them a favor by providing a graceful exit." Robert nodded slowly. "Timeline?" "I'd like to move quickly. I estimate we could have preliminary negotiations completed within 6 weeks, pending board approval." "Approved. Make it happen." As they left the conference room, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city. In 6 weeks, I would be sitting across a negotiation table from my father, representing the company that was about to buy his life's work. He would have no idea that the woman he'd dismissed as incapable of leadership was now in control of his company's fate. The real question was, when the moment came, would I tell him who I really was? The next 4 weeks were a carefully orchestrated dance of corporate espionage and family deception. I couldn't let anyone at Meridian know about my personal connection to Chen Manufacturing, which meant I had to conduct the most important negotiation of my career while pretending it was just another deal. My first step was assembling the perfect acquisition team. I chose Michael Torres, our most diplomatic negotiator, someone who could handle sensitive family business situations. For financial analysis, I brought in Lisa Wang, who specialized in manufacturing sector valuations. Most importantly, I made sure I would be present for every interaction as the senior oversight for this acquisition. The initial contact had to be handled delicately. Instead of a cold call, I had Michael reach out through Chen Manufacturing's business attorney, Richard Phillips, whom I'd identified through public records. The approach was professional but urgent. Meridian Global Holdings was interested in exploring strategic partnership opportunities, with potential for full acquisition if there was mutual interest. Dad's response came through Phillips within 48 hours. He was willing to meet, but only for preliminary discussions. No commitments, no detailed financial disclosures until he understood exactly what Meridian wanted. I spent the weekend before our first meeting preparing in ways my team couldn't understand. While they reviewed standard financial models and market analyses, I was studying my father's psychology, his pride points, his fears, his negotiation style based on 15 years of dinner table conversations. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at Chen Manufacturing's offices. I'd driven past the facility countless times growing up, but I'd never been inside the actual business operations. As our rental car pulled up to the modest industrial building with its faded Chen Manufacturing Solutions sign, I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. Dad was waiting in the lobby, wearing his best suit, the same navy blue one he'd worn to my high school graduation. He looked smaller than I remembered, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and financial stress. "Mr. Chen, I'm Michael Torres from Meridian Global Holdings," Michael said, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. This is Lisa Wang, our financial analyst, and Rebecca Thompson, Senior Vice President overseeing manufacturing acquisitions." I'd changed my last name for the meeting, something that felt both necessary and oddly liberating. Dad shook my hand. With no recognition whatsoever, his focus entirely on Michael as the presumed leader of our group. The tour of the facility was heartbreaking. Dad walked us through the production floor with obvious pride, explaining processes and showing off equipment that was clearly decades old. His employees, maybe 30 people total, worked diligently, but the inefficiencies were glaring. Manual processes that should have been automated, quality control procedures that relied on visual inspection rather than precision measurement, inventory management that appeared to be tracked on paper rather than digital systems. "We maintain the highest quality standards in the industry," Dad explained as we watched workers hand-assemble automotive gaskets. "You can't get this level of precision from machines." Lisa and I exchanged glances. The precision he was describing would be considered sloppy by modern manufacturing standards, and the labor costs were astronomical compared to automated alternatives. In the conference room afterward, Michael began the formal discussion. "Mr. Chen, Meridian is always looking for established manufacturing operations with growth potential. We're impressed by your client relationships and operational history." Dad leaned forward, interested but cautious. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We're exploring the possibility of acquiring Chen Manufacturing as part of our Southwest expansion strategy. We believe there are significant opportunities to modernize operations and increase market share." The word modernize made Dad's jaw tighten slightly. "My company is already efficient. We've been profitable for over 20 years. Lisa consulted her notes. "Mr. Chen, based on the financial information your attorney provided, it appears profitability has declined significantly in recent years." "Temporary market conditions," Dad replied curtly. "The automotive industry goes through cycles. We've weathered them before." I watched him deflect and minimize, using the same defensive patterns I'd seen throughout my childhood whenever anyone questioned his methods. But now I could see what I'd missed as a kid, the fear behind the bluster, the desperation beneath, the confidence. Michael pressed forward. "We understand family businesses face unique challenges, especially around succession planning. Does Chen Manufacturing have a clear leadership transition strategy?" Dad's face brightened slightly. "My son Marcus is finishing his MBA and will be joining the company next year. He'll eventually take over operations. And Marcus has manufacturing experience? He understands the business. He's been around it his whole life." I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that being around a business was completely different from understanding modern manufacturing operations, supply chain optimization, or financial management. The preliminary meeting ended with polite interest from both sides. Meridian would conduct a more detailed analysis, and Dad would consider whether he was genuinely interested in exploring a sale. As we walked back to our car, Michael shook his head. Classic family business denial. He's headed for bankruptcy within a year, but he's convinced everything is fine. What's your assessment? I asked carefully. The location and client base are valuable, but we'd essentially be buying assets and starting over. Complete equipment overhaul, new management systems, probably retain maybe half the current workforce. It's doable, but only if we can get the price right. Over the next 2 weeks, I orchestrated a comprehensive due diligence process. Our team of auditors, engineers, and market analysts descended on Chen Manufacturing, examining every aspect of the operation. Dad cooperated reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with outsiders scrutinizing his life's work. The detailed analysis confirmed our initial assessment. The company was hemorrhaging money, with debt obligations that would become unmanageable within 6 months. Their largest client had already given notice that they wouldn't renew their contract, which would eliminate 40% of Chen Manufacturing's revenue. Most telling was a conversation I overheard between Dad and Marcus during one of our site visits. Marcus had driven down from Tempe to observe the due diligence process, and they were talking in Dad's office with the door partially open. "Dad, these people seem to know what they're talking about," Marcus was saying. "Maybe we should seriously consider their offer. Son, I didn't build this company to sell it to some corporate vultures who'll gut it for parts. But if we're really in as much trouble as they're suggesting, we're not in trouble. We're going through a rough patch, that's all. Every business has ups and downs." Marcus's voice carried a frustration I recognized from my own teenage years. "Dad, I've been looking at our books. The numbers don't lie. We're losing money every month." Numbers don't tell the whole story. This business is about relationships, about reputation, about quality. Things you can't put in a spreadsheet. Closed my eyes, remembering similar conversations from my own past. Dad's inability to separate emotional attachment from business reality was exactly what had driven me away from the family business and toward corporate strategy. The irony was devastating. Here I was, representing a Fortune 500 company with the power to save his business, while he remained convinced that corporate executives were his enemies. The formal offer came together over the following week. Based on our analysis, Meridian would acquire Chen Manufacturing for $12 million, assume all existing debt, and commit to a $40 million modernization investment over 2 years. Existing employees would be offered positions in the restructured operation, and Dad could remain as a consultant during the transition period. It was an incredibly generous offer for a company facing imminent bankruptcy. We were essentially paying him to take over his problems and fix them. The negotiation meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. As I prepared for what would either be the culmination of my career or the destruction of my family relationships, one question haunted me. When the time came to reveal my identity, would my father finally recognize that the daughter he'd dismissed as incapable of leadership was now in control of his company's fate? The night before the final negotiation, I couldn't sleep. I stood in my Manhattan apartment at 2 a.m., looking out at the city lights, rehearsing different scenarios in my mind. Should I reveal my identity at the beginning of the meeting? Wait until after we'd reached terms? Or keep my secret forever and let him live, never knowing that his daughter had saved his company? I'd been carrying this burden alone for months, unable to confide in anyone. My team thought this was just another acquisition. My family had no idea what I really did for a living, and I couldn't risk exposing the conflict of interest to Meridian's leadership. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at Chen Manufacturing's offices. Dad had insisted on home turf, probably hoping the familiar environment would give him psychological advantage. What he didn't realize was that I'd spent countless hours in that building through our due diligence process, studying every corner, understanding the layout better than he imagined. I arrived with Michael and Lisa 30 minutes early, ostensibly to review our strategy, but really to calm my nerves. As we set up our materials in the conference room, I caught sight of Dad through the window, pacing in the parking lot while talking on his phone. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept running his hand through his graying hair. Marcus arrived at 9:45, looking nervous in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. He nodded politely to our team, clearly, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. Dad joined us precisely at 10 a.m., followed by Richard Phillips, his attorney, and an accountant I didn't recognize. "Before we begin," Dad said, settling into his chair at the head of the table, "I want to make something clear. Chen Manufacturing isn't just a business to me. It's my legacy, my life's work. Whatever we discuss today needs to respect that." Michael nodded diplomatically. "We absolutely understand, Mr. Chen. That's why we've structured our offer to preserve the company's core values while positioning it for future growth." Dad's expression remained skeptical. "Let's hear what you're proposing." Lisa opened her presentation. Folder. Meridian Global Holdings is prepared to offer $12 million for 100% ownership of Chen Manufacturing Solutions. This includes the assumption of all current debt obligations, which our analysis values at approximately $4.2 million. The number hit Dad like a physical blow. I watched his face cycle through surprise, calculation, and something that looked like relief before settling back into guarded wariness. "Additionally," I said, speaking for the first time, "Meridian commits to investing $40 million over the next 24 months in equipment modernization, facility upgrades, and workforce development. Our goal is to transform Chen Manufacturing into the most efficient automotive parts producer in the Southwest." Marcus leaned forward, interested. "What happens to current employees?" "Every current employee will be offered a position in the restructured operation," Michael replied. "Some roles will change as we implement new technologies, but we're committed to retaining local talent and providing extensive retraining programs." Dad's attorney whispered something in his ear, then addressed our team. "What about management? Structure? Mr. Chen has significant operational expertise that shouldn't be overlooked." I took a breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. "We'd like to offer Mr. Chen a 2-year consulting contract at $200,000 annually, with full benefits. His knowledge of client relationships and operational history would be invaluable during the transition." The room fell silent. $200,000 was more than Dad had probably earned in the past 3 years combined, and everyone knew it. Marcus broke the silence. "Dad, this sounds like an incredible opportunity," but Dad was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Ms. Thompson, you seem very familiar with our operations for someone who's only been here a few weeks." My heart started racing. Had he recognized me? "I've made it my business to understand companies we're considering for acquisition, Mr. Chen. Thorough preparation is essential for successful negotiations." He continued studying my face, and I realized with growing panic that something had triggered his suspicion. Maybe my voice, maybe a mannerism, maybe just the way I'd been asking questions that demonstrated too much insight into his business. "Thompson," he said slowly. "That's an interesting name. Not one you hear much in corporate circles." Michael jumped in. "Mr. Chen, should we focus on the terms of the offer? We're prepared to execute contracts today if you're interested in moving forward." But Dad wasn't listening to Michael anymore. His attention was entirely focused on me, and I could see recognition dawning in his eyes like a sunrise I couldn't stop. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "you remind me of someone. The way you talk about manufacturing processes, the questions you ask, it's almost like you've heard these conversations before." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lisa and Michael were looking between Dad and me, clearly sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. Marcus appeared confused, his gaze shifting from his father to me and back again. I had 2 choices. Deny everything and hope he dropped it, or control the revelation myself. In that split second, 15 years of corporate negotiation experience kicked in. When you're about to lose control of a situation, the only option is to seize control completely. I stood up slowly, maintaining eye contact with my father. "You're right, Mr. Chen. I am familiar with these conversations. I've been hearing them my entire life." The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael and Lisa were staring at me in shock, beginning to understand that something extraordinary was happening. Marcus looked completely lost. Dad's face had gone white. "My name isn't Rebecca Thompson," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heartbeat. "It's Rebecca Chen. I'm your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. Marcus's mouth fell open. Richard Phillips looked like he was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "That's impossible," Dad whispered. "Rebecca works in consulting. She lives in New York. But she doesn't." "I'm Senior Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions for Meridian Global Holdings," I said, still standing. "I oversee all manufacturing sector acquisitions for North America. I have 12 people reporting to me and decision-making authority over deals up to $500 million. Dad shook his head violently. No, that's not possible. You're a consultant. You help companies with their strategies or something." "I've never been a consultant, Dad. I joined Meridian straight out of Stanford 15 years ago as an analyst in their corporate development division. I've been acquiring companies like yours for over a decade. The truth was spreading across," his face like a stain. "All those years of dismissing my career, of never asking for details, of assuming I was doing some minor support role in the business world. He'd never bothered to really understand what I did, because he'd already decided it wasn't important." Marcus found his voice first. "Rebecca, you're saying you work for the company that wants to buy us?" "I'm saying I work for the company that's going to save Dad's business from bankruptcy. Because without this acquisition, Chen Manufacturing has maybe 4 months before it's forced into liquidation." Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is some kind of setup, some kind of corporate trick." "It's not a trick, Dad. It's ironic. You spent my entire childhood telling me that women couldn't lead, that business required a man's touch, that I should focus on more suitable careers. Meanwhile, I was building the exact skills that could have helped Chen Manufacturing avoid this situation in the first place. The dam had burst, and 15 years of suppressed frustration came flooding out. You want to know the real tragedy? I could have helped you modernize this company years ago. I could have shown you how to optimize your supply chain, reduce costs, and identify new market opportunities. But you never asked, because you'd already decided that anything I knew about business wasn't worth hearing. Dad's face was cycling through emotions: shock, anger, confusion, and something that might have been shame. You manipulated this whole situation. You set me up. I saved you, I shot back. When I found Chen Manufacturing in our acquisition database, I could have let someone else handle the deal. Someone who would have offered you half what we're offering, gutted your workforce, and turned this place into a warehouse. Instead, I personally oversaw an acquisition package that preserves jobs, invests in modernization, and gives you a graceful exit with your dignity intact. The room had become a pressure cooker of emotions and revelations. Michael and Lisa were sitting frozen, probably wondering if they should call security or a lawyer. Marcus looked like he was watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. But it was Dad's reaction that mattered most. He was staring at me not with anger now, but with something approaching awe mixed with devastating realization. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Dad slowly sank back into his chair, his hands trembling slightly as he processed everything I'd just revealed. The confident businessman who'd walked into this meeting had vanished, replaced by a man confronting the complete collapse of his assumptions about his own daughter. 15 years. he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You've been doing this for 15 years, and I never knew. You never asked, I replied, sitting back down but maintaining eye contact. Every time I came home, you'd ask about my health, about whether I was dating anyone, about when I might settle down and have kids. You never once asked what I actually did at work. Marcus cleared his throat, clearly struggling to process the family drama unfolding in front of strangers. Rebecca, I don't understand. If you've been so successful, why didn't you ever tell us? I turned to my younger brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. He wasn't the golden child heir I'd resented. He was just a confused young man trying to figure out his place in a family business that was falling apart. Because Dad made it clear that my opinions about business weren't welcome. Remember sophomore year when I suggested he should look into computerized inventory management? He told me to focus on my studies and leave business decisions to people who understood them. Dad winced at the memory. That was different. You were just a kid. I was 20 years old with 2 years of business school behind me. But you saw a daughter giving unsolicited advice, not a future executive identifying operational inefficiencies. Richard Phillips, Dad's attorney, finally broke his stunned silence. Perhaps we should take a break to process this development. No, I said firmly. We're going to finish this conversation, because Dad needs to understand exactly what's been happening while he's been convinced that women can't lead companies. I stood up again and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room. Using a marker, I began sketching out organizational charts and financial flows. This is Meridian Global Holdings, I said, drawing boxes and connecting them with lines. $68 billion in annual revenue, 43,000 employees across 17 countries. I sit here, I marked an X near the top of the chart, reporting directly to the CEO, with authority over acquisitions worth up to $500 million. Dad was staring at the whiteboard like it was written in a foreign language. In the past 5 years alone, I've personally overseen the acquisition of 23 manufacturing companies. Combined, those deals were worth $2.4 billion. The companies we've acquired have created over 8,000 new jobs and increased their revenue by an average of 47% within 2 years of acquisition. I turned back to face the room. So when you say women can't lead, Dad, you're talking about someone who's been leading at a level you've never experienced, making decisions that affect more people than live in your entire city. The weight of this revelation was visible on his face. Everything he thought he knew about success, about leadership, about his own daughter, was crumbling in real time. Michael, who'd been sitting in shocked silence, finally found his voice. Rebecca, I think we should discuss the conflict of interest implications of this situation. There's no conflict, I replied without taking my eyes off Dad. I disclosed the potential personal connection to our legal department before initiating contact. This acquisition was approved through normal channels with appropriate oversight. The only difference is that I ensured Chen Manufacturing received the most generous terms we've ever offered a company in this condition. Lisa was frantically taking notes, probably already planning how to document this unprecedented situation for Meridian's files. Dad looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of respect, regret, and something that might have been fear. Why? He asked. After everything I said, everything I believed. Why would you help me? For the first time since the revelation began, my composure cracked slightly. Because you're my father. Because despite everything you said about women and leadership, you taught me about quality and integrity and never giving up. Those lessons just took a different form than you expected. I sat back down, suddenly feeling exhausted. And because I wanted to prove something to myself, I wanted to know if I could save your company better than any son could have. Marcus leaned forward. What happens now? With the deal, I mean. Michael consulted his notes. The offer stands as presented. If Mr. Chen accepts, Meridian will acquire Chen Manufacturing, implement the modernization plan, and honor all the terms we've discussed. And Rebecca? Dad asked quietly. I'll oversee the transition personally. I'll make sure every employee who wants to stay has a place in the new operation. I'll work with you during the consulting period to preserve the relationships and institutional knowledge that took you 30 years to build. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands folded on the table. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. I was wrong, he said simply. About women, about leadership, about you. I was completely, catastrophically wrong. The admission hung in the air like a bridge between our past and whatever came next. The hardest part, he continued, is realizing that if I'd listened to you, if I'd asked for your help, Chen Manufacturing might never have gotten into this situation in the first place. Maybe, I said. Or maybe you needed to build something yourself first, and I needed to prove myself in the wider world. Maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to happen. Marcus spoke up. What about my role in all this? I was supposed to take over the company. I looked at my brother with new understanding. Marcus, if you're serious about manufacturing, there will be a place for you in the new operation. But not as a legacy hire, as someone who earns their position through capability and results. Are you up for that? He nodded slowly. I think I'd like that better anyway. Richard Phillips cleared his throat. Mr. Chen, you need to make a decision about the offer. But given these revelations, you might want some time to consider. Dad shook his head. No, I don't need time. He looked directly at me. Rebecca, I accept Meridian's offer. All of it. The acquisition, the consulting contract, your oversight of the transition. He paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. And I'd like to publicly apologize to my daughter for failing to recognize her achievements and for letting my prejudices blind me to her capabilities. The formality of his words couldn't hide the genuine remorse behind them. For the first time, in my adult life, I felt like my father was actually seeing me. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small framed photo, the first picture ever taken at Chen Manufacturing, showing him standing in front of a single machine in 1992. I want you to have this. Because you're not just acquiring my company, you're carrying forward everything it was supposed to represent. And you're going to do it better than I ever could. As I took the frame from his hands, our fingers touched briefly. In that moment, 34 years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities seemed to crystallize into something approaching forgiveness. The contracts were signed that afternoon. Within 6 months, Chen Manufacturing had transformed into one of the most efficient automotive parts producers in the Southwest, exactly as I'd projected. Dad honored his consulting contract, working alongside me to ensure the transition preserved the best of what he'd built while embracing the innovations he'd once resisted. Marcus joined the company as a production analyst and proved himself capable of bridging the gap between old-school craftsmanship and modern efficiency. He never became the heir apparent Dad had envisioned, but he became something better, a professional who earned respect through competence rather than birthright. But the real transformation wasn't in the company's balance sheets or production metrics. It was in a father finally understanding that the daughter he'd underestimated had become the leader he'd never imagined possible. 3 months after the acquisition closed, Dad called me with news that would cement our new relationship forever. Chen Manufacturing, now operating as a Meridian subsidiary, had just landed the largest contract in its history, worth $45 million over 3 years. I wanted you to hear it from me first, he said over the phone, his voice filled with pride. My daughter, the executive who saved my company, just secured our biggest deal ever. For the first time in our relationship, David Chen was bragging about his daughter's business accomplishments. And I was finally proud to be his daughter. What I didn't expect was how quickly word would spread through the business community about what had happened at Chen Manufacturing. Within weeks, the story had become legend in Phoenix manufacturing circles. The daughter who'd secretly acquired her father's company and transformed it into a regional powerhouse. But the real ripple effects were just beginning. 2 months after the acquisition closed, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer Martinez, CEO of Southwest Industrial Partners, one of the largest manufacturing consortiums in the region. "Rebecca, I hope you don't mind the direct approach, but I've been hearing incredible things about what you accomplished with Chen Manufacturing. I'd like to discuss a potential partnership opportunity." The opportunity she described was staggering. Southwest Industrial Partners represented 43 manufacturing companies across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. They were looking to modernize their entire network through strategic partnerships with larger corporations, and they wanted Meridian to lead the initiative. "The Chen manufacturing transformation has become our case study," Jennifer explained. "During our meeting the following week, you took a struggling family business and turned it into a model of efficiency while preserving jobs and respecting the founder's legacy. That's exactly what our member companies need." The partnership deal that emerged was worth over $200 million, the largest manufacturing sector acquisition in Meridian's history. I would oversee the entire program, effectively becoming responsible for modernizing nearly a quarter of Southwest's mid-market manufacturing base. When I called Robert Hayes to brief him on the opportunity, his response was immediate. "Rebecca, this is exactly the kind of transformational deal that defines careers. I'm promoting you to Executive Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions, reporting directly to me. Your authority ceiling is now $1 billion. At 36 years old, I had become one of the youngest EVPs in Meridian's history, with decision-making authority that placed me among the most powerful executives in American manufacturing. But the promotion came with an unexpected personal cost. The Southwest Industrial Partners program would require me to relocate to Phoenix to oversee operations directly. After 15 years in New York, I would be moving back home, not as the dismissed daughter, but as the executive responsible for reshaping the region's industrial landscape. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I was returning to the city where my father had told me women couldn't lead, now holding more corporate authority than any woman in Arizona's history. The transition back to Phoenix was surreal. I found myself house hunting in Scottsdale neighborhoods I'd only dreamed of as a child, with a relocation budget that exceeded my father's annual revenue just 2 years earlier. The local business journal ran a cover story about my appointment, complete with a photo of me standing in front of Chen Manufacturing's newly modernized facility. Dad framed that magazine cover and hung it in his office, the same office where he'd once told me to pursue more suitable careers. The Southwest Industrial Partners program launched 6 months later with a celebration that attracted over 500 business leaders from across the region. The event was held at the Phoenix Convention Center, and I was the keynote speaker. As I stood at the podium looking out at the audience, I spotted familiar faces throughout the crowd. Former high school classmates who'd become local business owners, college professors who'd taught me economics, and sitting in the front row, my parents and Marcus. 5 years ago, I began, if someone had told me I'd be standing here as an executive responsible for transforming Southwest manufacturing, I would have laughed. Not because the goal seemed impossible, but because I never imagined coming home would mean coming home as a leader. The speech I gave that night wasn't about business strategy or market analysis. It was about the power of persistence, the importance of believing in yourself when others don't, and the responsibility that comes with proving people wrong. Success isn't just about achieving your goals, I said, making eye contact with Dad in the front row. It's about expanding the definition of what's possible for the people who come after you. After the event, Dad approached me with tears in his eyes. "Rebecca, I've been thinking about what you said up there, about expanding definitions of what's possible." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I've been talking to some of the other business owners in the program, men my age who've been running companies for decades, And you know what they all say? They say their daughters are smarter than their sons, more dedicated, better with people. But they're all making the same mistake I made, assuming that intelligence and dedication don't translate to leadership capability. What are you saying, Dad? I'm saying I want to help fix that. I want to create a mentorship program for daughters of business owners. Connect them with executives like you who can show them what's possible. The program Dad envisioned became reality within a year. The Southwest Daughters Leadership Initiative paired young women from business families with successful female executives across various industries. I served as the program's advisory board chair, helping to design curricula that addressed the specific challenges facing women in family business environments. Our first cohort included 25 women aged 18 to 30, daughters of thus business owners who'd been overlooked, underestimated, or channeled toward supporting roles despite their capabilities. The program provided them with executive mentorship, business education, and most importantly, examples of women who'd successfully transitioned from dismissed daughters to corporate leaders. One of our first success stories was Maria Santos, whose father owned a construction company in Tucson. Like me, she'd been told that construction was men's work and encouraged to pursue administrative roles. Through the program, she connected with female executives in the construction industry and developed the confidence to start her own general contracting firm. Within 2 years, Maria's company had grown to 40 employees and was competing directly with her father's business. Unlike my story, though, her father embraced her success from the beginning, eventually proposing a merger that would combine their companies under her leadership. The difference, Maria told me during one of our quarterly check-ins, is that your story changed the conversation. When I told my dad I wanted to start my own construction company, he didn't dismiss it because he'd already heard about what you accomplished. He knew it was possible. The ripple effects continued expanding. Local universities began inviting me to speak at their business schools. Young women would approach me after these talks, sharing their own stories of family members who'd underestimated their potential. Many of them applied for internships at Meridian, and I made sure our Southwest operations became a destination for talented women seeking careers in corporate strategy. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the change. In my relationship with Marcus, my brother had thrived in his new role at Chen Manufacturing, but more importantly, he'd become an advocate for women in manufacturing. He started a blog called Beyond the Boys Club that featured stories of women succeeding in traditionally male-dominated industries. I realized something after watching what you accomplished, he told me during one of our monthly dinner meetings. Dad didn't just underestimate you, he underestimated half the talent pool. How many other brilliant women never got the chance to prove themselves because of assumptions like his? The question haunted me, but it also motivated me. If my story could prevent even one father from dismissing his daughter's potential, then everything I'd been through would be worthwhile. 3 years after the Chen Manufacturing acquisition, I received a call that would bring everything full circle. Harvard Business School was developing a case study about family business transitions and wanted to feature my story in their curriculum. We're particularly interested in the intersection of family dynamics and corporate acquisition strategy, explained Professor Catherine Williams, who was leading the project. Your case represents a unique example of how personal relationships can both complicate and enhance business decisions. The case study, titled Leadership Across Generations, the Chen Manufacturing Acquisition, became one of Harvard's most requested materials. MBA students across the country were analyzing my negotiation strategy, examining the ethical implications of the personal conflict of interest, and debating whether I'd made the right choice in revealing my identity. But for me, the most important outcome was simpler. I had become the example I'd wished for as a young woman. Somewhere, a business school student was reading about my story and realizing that being underestimated by family didn't mean accepting limitations on their potential. The little girl who'd been told she couldn't lead had become the executive, who showed others that leadership comes in many forms. Sometimes it means building something new, and sometimes it means saving something that already exists. 5 years after that life-changing negotiation, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined. The boardroom of Meridian Global Holdings, 43 floors above Manhattan, where I was presenting the annual report on our Southwest manufacturing operations to the company's board of directors. The Southwest Industrial Partners Program has exceeded all projections, I reported to the 12 board members seated around the polished mahogany table. Revenue across all 43 partner companies has increased by an average of 62% since program inception. Total job creation stands at over 8,000 positions, with an average wage increase of 34%. Robert Hayes, now chairman of the board, smiled with obvious pride. Rebecca, these results represent the most successful regional transformation program in Meridian's history. What's your assessment of the program's long-term sustainability? The foundation is solid, I replied, clicking to the next slide of my presentation. We've established a self-sustaining ecosystem where modernized companies are now mentoring newer program participants. Chen Manufacturing, our original acquisition, has become a training hub that other companies visit to learn best practices. But as I presented those impressive statistics, my mind wandered to a conversation I'd had with Dad just that morning. He'd called from the Chen Manufacturing facility, where he was hosting a group of business owners from Colorado who wanted to implement similar modernization programs in their region. Rebecca, you should have seen their faces when I showed them. The production floor, he'd said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. They couldn't believe we were the same company that was failing 5 years ago. And when I told them my daughter was the executive who made it all possible, their jaws dropped to the floor. That transformation in my father, from someone who couldn't envision women in leadership to someone who actively promoted my accomplishments, had become the template for change I witnessed throughout the program. But it was the unexpected consequences of that change that created the most profound impacts. After my board presentation, I flew back to Phoenix for what had become a quarterly tradition, the Southwest Daughters Leadership Initiative graduation ceremony. This cohort included 32 women, the largest group yet, representing families from 6 different states. The ceremony was held at the renovated Chen Manufacturing Conference Center, the same room where I'd revealed my identity to Dad 5 years earlier. As I looked out at the graduates and their families, I saw fathers who were beaming with pride at their daughters' achievements, a stark contrast to the skepticism that had once greeted women's ambitions in business. But it was the keynote speaker who truly captured how far we'd all come. Maria Santos, the construction company owner who'd been part of our first cohort, was now running the 3rd largest general contracting firm in Arizona. She'd recently been named to the state's Economic Development Council and was actively lobbying for policies that supported women-owned businesses. 5 years ago, I thought my biggest challenge was convincing my father that women could succeed in construction, Maria said to the packed auditorium. What I discovered was that changing one mind creates ripples that extend far beyond your own family. Today, women represent 28% of new business licenses in Arizona's construction sector, compared to 8% when I started my company. During the reception afterward, I was approached by Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a business professor from Arizona State University who'd been documenting the program's impact. Rebecca, I wanted to share some preliminary findings from our longitudinal study, she said, pulling out a tablet loaded with research data. We've been tracking not just the women who've participated in your program, but their family businesses and their communities. The data she showed me was staggering. Companies whose daughters had participated in the leadership initiative were 47% more likely to implement modernization programs within 2 years. These same companies showed higher employee satisfaction rates, lower turnover, and increased profitability compared to similar businesses with traditional male-only succession planning. But here's the most interesting finding, Dr. Rodriguez continued. We're seeing second-generation effects. Sons in these families are more likely to pursue collaborative leadership styles and less likely to dismiss female colleagues' contributions. The change in family dynamics is reshaping how these future male leaders approach business relationships. Marcus exemplified this perfectly. He'd recently been promoted to operations director at Chen Manufacturing and had implemented what he called inclusive decision-making protocols, formal processes that ensured diverse perspectives were considered in all major business decisions. I realized that Dad's old approach wasn't just unfair to women, Marcus had explained to me during one of our recent conversations. It was bad business. Some of our best innovations have come from employees whose ideas never would have been heard under the old system. The transformation at Chen Manufacturing had become a case study not just at Harvard, but at business schools across the country. What made it unique wasn't just the acquisition strategy or the family dynamics, but the measurable cultural change that had occurred within the organization. Dr. Sarah Kim, an organizational psychologist who'd studied the Chen Manufacturing transformation, published findings that challenged conventional wisdom about family business succession. The Chen case demonstrates that disrupting traditional power structures can actually strengthen family businesses, she wrote in the Harvard Business Review. When competence becomes the primary criterion for leadership rather than gender or birth order, family businesses become more resilient and adaptable. But perhaps the most unexpected development came 18 months after the graduation ceremony. I received a call from Amanda Foster, CEO of Foster Industries, a Fortune 200 manufacturing conglomerate based in Detroit. "Rebecca, I've been following your work in the Southwest with great interest," she said during our initial conversation. "We're facing succession challenges across multiple family-owned companies in our supply chain. Many of these businesses are struggling with the same issues your father's company faced: aging leadership, resistance to modernization, and overlooking qualified female family members." What Amanda proposed was ambitious beyond anything I'd previously considered. Foster Industries wanted to create a national program modeled on our Southwest initiative, with me leading the effort as Chief Strategy Officer for Family Business Development, a newly created executive position that would report directly to their board of directors. The role would involve establishing modernization programs in 12 major metropolitan areas, working with family businesses that represent over $2 billion in combined annual revenue, Amanda explained. You'd have a team of 50 people and complete autonomy over program development and implementation. The offer represented the culmination of everything I'd worked toward: the opportunity to take the lessons learned from Dad's transformation and apply them on a national scale. But it also meant leaving Meridian, the company that had shaped my career and given me the platform to prove my capabilities. When I discussed the opportunity with Robert Hayes, his response surprised me. "Rebecca, this is exactly what I hoped would happen when we first started working together," he said during our meeting in his corner office. "We hired you to acquire companies, but you've done something far more valuable. You've shown how to transform entire business ecosystems." He stood up and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan, the same view I'd contemplated during so many pivotal moments in my career. "Meridian will always be your corporate home, but your impact has grown beyond what any single company can contain. Foster Industries is offering you the chance to change how America thinks about family business succession. That's a responsibility that transcends individual career considerations." The decision to accept the Foster Industries position was both the easiest and most difficult choice of my career. Easy because it represented the logical next step in expanding the program's impact. Difficult because it meant leaving the security of Meridian for the uncertainty of building something entirely new. My farewell reception at Meridian drew over 300 people: executives, analysts, support staff, and acquisition targets I'd worked with over the years. But the most meaningful moment came when Sarah Morrison, my original mentor, pulled me aside for a private conversation. 15 years ago, when you were a young analyst researching manufacturing companies, did you ever imagine your career would Lead to this? She asked. I thought about that question for a moment, remembering the ambitious young woman who'd joined Meridian straight out of Stanford, desperate to prove herself in a world that seemed designed to exclude her. Honestly, no. I thought success would mean climbing the corporate ladder high enough that people like my father would finally take me seriously. I never imagined that changing one person's mind could create opportunities to change entire industries. That's the difference between individual success and transformational leadership, Sarah replied. Individual success is about proving yourself to skeptics. Transformational leadership is about eliminating the need for others to prove themselves at all. The transition to Foster Industries happened over a 6-month period, during which I developed implementation strategies for what we called the National Family Business Modernization Initiative. The program would launch simultaneously in 12 cities: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Houston, Memphis, Milwaukee, Nashville, Pittsburgh, Portland, Seattle, and St. Louis. Each location would have a dedicated team responsible for identifying family businesses facing succession challenges, developing customized modernization plans, and connecting qualified family members, particularly daughters, with mentorship and leadership development opportunities. But the program's scope extended beyond individual company transformations. We partnered with major universities to establish family business research centers, worked with state economic development offices to create supportive policy frameworks, and collaborated with financial institutions to develop specialized lending programs for modernization investments. The launch event, held at the Detroit Economic Club, attracted over 800 attendees representing family businesses with combined revenues exceeding $15 billion. The keynote address was delivered via video conference by Dad, speaking from the Chen manufacturing facility. 5 years ago, I was a struggling business owner convinced that my way of doing things was the only way, he said to the packed auditorium. Today, I'm the proud father of an executive who's about to transform how American family businesses think about their futures. If an old-fashioned manufacturer from Phoenix can learn to embrace new ideas about leadership, anyone can. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in attendance. The man who'd once dismissed women's leadership capabilities was now introducing his daughter as she launched the largest family business transformation program in American history. As I took the podium that evening, I looked out at an audience filled with business owners, their adult children, university researchers, and government officials. Many of the faces belonged to women who'd been told, like me, that they weren't suited for leadership roles in their family businesses. Change doesn't happen overnight, I began, but it does happen when we're willing to challenge our assumptions about who can lead and how leadership develops. The young woman I was 15 years ago couldn't have imagined standing here today, not because she lacked ambition, but because she couldn't envision a world where her potential would be recognized and nurtured. I paused, thinking about all the conversations, confrontations, and revelations that had led to this moment. Success isn't just about achieving your personal goals. It's about creating conditions where others don't have to overcome the same obstacles you faced. It's about transforming skeptics into advocates and turning personal victories into systemic change. The program launched officially 3 months later, and the results exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Within the first year, we'd partnered with over 400 family businesses, facilitated succession planning for companies representing $12 billion in annual revenue, and created leadership development opportunities for over 800 women who'd previously been overlooked for executive roles. But the metric that mattered most to me was simpler: the number of fathers who called to tell me about their daughters' business accomplishments, their voices filled with the same pride that had once been reserved exclusively for their sons. 3 years after joining Foster Industries, I received recognition that crystallized everything I'd worked to achieve. Forbes magazine named me to their annual Most Powerful Women in Business list, with a profile that began, "Rebecca Chen has fundamentally changed how American family businesses think about leadership succession, proving that the most transformational leaders often emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. The article detailed the National Family Business Modernization Initiative's impact. Over 2,000 companies transformed, $15 billion in new investment generated, and more than 50,000 jobs created or upgraded. But it also told the personal story, the daughter who'd been dismissed by her own father, only to become the executive who saved his company and inspired a national movement. That evening, Dad called me from Phoenix, his voice thick with emotion. "Rebecca, I just read the Forbes article. I want you to know that I've framed it and hung it in the Chen manufacturing lobby, right next to the photo from our first day in business." He paused, collecting his thoughts. 30 years ago, when I started this company, I thought I was building something for my son to inherit. I never imagined I was actually raising the daughter who would revolutionize how business families think about their futures. I'm prouder of you than I've ever been of anything in my life. As I hung up the phone that evening, I realized that the greatest transformation hadn't been Chen Manufacturing's modernization or the National Family Business Initiative's success. It has been the evolution of a relationship from dismissal to partnership, from skepticism to pride, from girls can't lead to my daughter is leading the way. The scared young woman who'd sat in her father's office 20 years earlier, being told to pursue more suitable careers, had become the executive whose work was reshaping American business culture. But more importantly, she'd become the daughter. Her father never knew he'd always wanted. Sometimes the most powerful victories aren't the ones that prove others wrong. They're the ones that help others become right. But my story was far from over. 2 years after the Forbes recognition, I received an invitation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the scope of my impact. The invitation came from Dr. Margaret Chen, no relation, despite sharing my married name, a sociologist, at Columbia University, who had been conducting a comprehensive study on generational change in American business culture. "Rebecca, I've been tracking the societal implications of your work for the past 4 years," Dr. Chen explained during our initial video call. "What started as corporate acquisitions has evolved into something much larger, a fundamental shift in how American families approach economic opportunity and gender roles." Her research revealed patterns I hadn't anticipated. In communities where the National Family Business Initiative had been active, daughters were 73% more likely to pursue business degrees, sons were 45% more likely to support female colleagues in leadership positions, and parents were significantly more likely to encourage both daughters and sons to explore non-traditional career paths. "You've essentially created a blueprint for cultural change," Dr. Chen continued. "But what's particularly fascinating is how this change is spreading beyond business families. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, professional parents across all sectors are reconsidering their assumptions about their children's potential based on stories they've heard about your program." This revelation led to an unexpected phone call from Dr. James Patterson, director of the White House Office of Economic Policy. The Biden administration was developing a national initiative to address gender disparities in business leadership, and they wanted to understand how the principles behind my program could be applied to federal policy. "Ms. Chen, we've been analyzing economic data from regions where your program has been active," Dr. Patterson explained during our meeting in Washington. "The correlation between your initiative and increased female business ownership, higher wages, and improved economic mobility is undeniable. We'd like to explore how to scale these approaches nationally." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. Here I was, the daughter who'd once been told she wasn't suited for business, being consulted by the federal government on how to reshape American economic policy. The irony would have been laughable if it hadn't been so profound. The White House initiative, officially launched as the American Family Business Opportunity Act, provided federal funding for states to establish their own family business modernization programs. The legislation included provisions for mentorship programs, modernization grants, and educational initiatives specifically designed to address gender disparities in business succession. But the most significant development came when I received a call from an unexpected source. Tokyo, Japan. Hiroshi Tanaka, CEO of Tanaka Industrial Group, one of Japan's largest manufacturing conglomerates, had heard about my work through international business networks. Chensan, Japanese family businesses, face very similar challenges to American ones, Mr. Tanaka explained through a translator during our video conference. Traditional succession planning often overlooks qualified female family members. We would like to adapt your approach for Japanese business culture. The prospect of taking the program international was both thrilling and daunting. Japanese business culture was even more traditionally patriarchal than what I'd encountered in America, but the potential impact was enormous. Japan's economy was dominated by family businesses, many of which were struggling with aging leadership and succession challenges. The international expansion began with a pilot program in Osaka, focusing on manufacturing families facing similar challenges to what we'd addressed in the American Southwest. The cultural adaptations required were significant. Japanese business relationships operate on different principles of respect, hierarchy, and communication, but the fundamental issues remained the same. Keiko Yamamoto, a 28-year-old woman whose family owned a precision electronics manufacturer, became our first Japanese success story. Her father had been planning to sell the business rather than pass it to his unsuitable daughter, but after working with our program, he recognized her MBA in operations management and her innovative ideas for automation. Before this program, I was preparing to accept that my family's business would be sold to strangers, Keiko told me during one of our monthly international video conferences. Now I'm implementing Industry 4.0 technologies that will make us competitive for the next generation. My father calls me the future of Yamamoto Electronics. The success in Japan led to inquiries from business families in South Korea, Taiwan, and eventually Germany, where family-owned middle-stand companies were grappling with similar succession challenges. Each new country required careful cultural adaptation, but the core principles remained consistent. Identify capable family members regardless of gender, provide them with mentorship and development opportunities, and create environments where competence rather than tradition determines leadership. By the program's 5th anniversary, we were operating in 12 countries across 4 continents, had worked with over 5,000 family businesses, and had created development opportunities for more than 12,000 women who had previously been overlooked for leadership roles. The personal cost of this success was something I hadn't anticipated. My marriage to David Chen, a financial analyst I'd met during my early days at Meridian, had ended 2 years earlier, not because of any dramatic conflict, but because my career had consumed so much of my energy and attention that we'd grown apart. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," David had said during our final conversation about the divorce. "But I married a corporate executive, not a social movement. I can't compete with the mission you've created." The end of my marriage forced me to confront a question I'd been avoiding. Was the price of changing the world worth the sacrifice of personal relationships? The answer came from an unexpected source, a letter from my niece, Marcus's daughter Emma, who was now 16 years old. "Aunt Rebecca," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that because of what you've done, I've never doubted that I could run a business someday. Dad talks about you all the time, and Grandpa shows everyone pictures of you from magazines. I know it. Probably cost you a lot to achieve what you have, but I want you to know that your sacrifice made it possible for girls like me to dream bigger." Emma's letter was followed by hundreds of similar messages from young women across the country and around the world. They shared stories of fathers who now encouraged their daughters' business ambitions, families who had conversations about leadership potential rather than gender limitations, and communities where female entrepreneurship was becoming normalized, rather than exceptional. The most moving letter came from Sarah Kim, a 22-year-old college senior whose Korean-American family owned a chain of restaurants in Los Angeles. Her parents had been part of our California expansion program 3 years earlier. "Ms. Chen, I'm writing to tell you that I'm graduating from UCLA with a degree in business administration, and my parents are planning to transition to restaurant management for me over the next 2 years. 5 years ago, they were convinced that restaurant management was too demanding for a woman. Today, my mother says I have better business instincts than my older brother. I know this change happened because of the program you created. Sarah's letter continued. But more than changing my family's mind, you changed my own expectations. I'm starting business school next year at Stanford, the same school where you studied. I want to create my own program someday, focused on helping immigrant families navigate succession planning while preserving their cultural values. You showed me that it's possible to honor tradition while challenging limitations. Reading these letters, I realized that the program's impact extended far beyond the businesses we'd directly worked with. We'd created a cultural shift that was being passed down through generations, changing not just how families approach succession planning, but how young women understood their own potential. The recognition for this broader impact came in an unexpected form. The United Nations invited me to speak at their annual Women's Economic Empowerment Summit, where I would address representatives from 130 countries about scalable approaches to addressing gender disparities in family business succession. Standing at the podium in the UN General Assembly Hall, looking out at delegates from around the world, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The scared young woman who had once sat in her father's office, being told that women couldn't lead, was now addressing the international community about how to unlock the economic potential of half the world's population. Change begins with a single conversation, I told the assembly. It begins when one person decides to challenge an assumption, to look beyond traditional expectations, to see potential where others see limitations. But lasting change happens when we create systems that make those individual transformations possible on a larger scale. The speech was broadcast globally and translated into 23 languages. Within weeks, I was receiving inquiries from government officials, business organizations, and educational institutions on 6 continents, all wanting to understand how to implement similar programs in their own contexts. But the most meaningful response came from Dad, who called me the night after the UN speech aired on television. "Rebecca, I watched your speech tonight," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and wonder. 30 years ago, when I told you that women couldn't lead, I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. I thought I was being realistic about the world as it was." He paused, and I could hear him collecting his thoughts. "What I didn't understand was that you weren't asking me to accept the world as it was. You were telling me that you intended to change it. And not only did you change it, you changed me, you changed our family, and now you're changing the world." That conversation with Dad crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months. The program had grown beyond what any single person could manage, and it was time to ensure its sustainability beyond my direct involvement. Working with Foster Industries, we established the Global Family Business Leadership Foundation, an independent organization that would continue expanding the program's reach while maintaining its core principles. The foundation's board included business leaders, academics, and program graduates from around the world. Most importantly, it included Dad, who had become one of the most effective advocates for the program's approach to succession planning. "I've become living proof that minds can change," he told audiences during speaking engagements. "If a stubborn, old manufacturer from Phoenix can learn to recognize his daughter's leadership potential, anyone can learn to see beyond their assumptions." The Foundation's first major initiative was establishing the Rebecca Chen Institute for Family Business Innovation at Stanford University, my alma mater. The institute would provide research, education, and consulting services to family businesses globally, while also training the next generation of professionals who would carry this work forward. At the Institute's dedication ceremony, I found myself standing in the same auditorium where I'd attended business school lectures 20 years earlier. Many of my former professors were in attendance, along with current students who were studying the case studies that had emerged from our program's work. 20 years ago, I sat in classrooms in this building, learning about corporate strategy and family business dynamics, I told the audience. I never imagined that the lessons I was learning would eventually lead to creating an institute dedicated to transforming those very dynamics. The ceremony concluded with remarks from Dr. Patricia Williams, the current dean of Stanford's Graduate School of Business, who had been following our program's development since its early days. The Rebecca Chen Institute represents more than just another research center, Dean Williams said. It represents the institutionalization of a fundamental shift in how we think about family business succession, gender roles in leadership, and the intersection of personal relationships and corporate strategy. As I listened to her words, I realized that we had achieved something unprecedented. We had taken a personal family conflict and transformed it into a global movement that was reshaping how societies think about gender, leadership, and economic opportunity. The scared young woman who had once been told she couldn't lead had become the architect of a system that was ensuring other young women would never have to hear those words. The daughter who had been dismissed by her own father had created a legacy that would outlast any individual career or achievement. But perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that the most powerful form of leadership isn't commanding others to follow you. It's creating conditions where others can discover their own potential to lead. The greatest victory wasn't proving that I could succeed despite my father's skepticism. It was helping him become the kind of father who would never doubt his daughter's potential in the first place. As I looked around the auditorium filled with the next generation of business leaders, I knew that the work would continue long after I was gone. The institute, the foundation, and the thousands of transformed families would ensure that the question, "Can women lead?" would eventually become as obsolete as the assumptions that had once limited my own potential. The little girl who had grown up believing she wasn't suited for business had become the woman who ensured that no little girl would ever have to accept such limitations again. And that, more than any corporate title or recognition, was the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.